Good evening, good afternoon, possibly even good morning, depending where you're joining us from. Welcome to the April edition of Lacan Scotland. Um, we're delighted this evening to be joined by Robert Beshara. Robert, as you will have known when you signed up, is going to talk to us this evening about Kanye West, or as Robert refers to him in the title of the talk and in the talk and in his preceding book as Ye. So I will let Robert contextualize some of the naming there. I'm not enormously knowledgeable at Kanye West myself, and I know him as Kanye West, but I think we're all going to get a bit of an education this evening. I was pondering in um, the run up to this, what's if we have a Venn diagram of Lacanians and Kanye West fans, to what extent or how large that overlap is, but I guess we're going to find out this evening. So those of you who are not familiar with Robert's work, Robert is the author of 4 books now, I believe, and the most recently published, at least, is this one, which relates to the talk tonight. The talk tonight isn't part of the book. My understanding is the talk is work that has emerged subsequent to the book and will be part of Robert's next book. So if you enjoy the talk tonight, there's more to come. In addition to his work as an author, Robert is an academic and works at college in New Mexico, where I presume you teach psychoanalysis. Robert, is that right?
Yeah, between mostly psychoanalysis, yeah.
Yep. So, Robert, thank you very much for joining us this evening. But without further ado, Robert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Calum and Amanda and Lacan in Scotland. I appreciate the invitation and appreciate everyone who's here to hear me talk about Ye and psychoanalysis. So the title of this presentation is Ye Antichrist with a question mark, and anti sort of in parentheses here to ask whether Ye is Christ or is he really Antichrist. And this is going to be kind of the exploration. And I do have a parental advisory regarding explicit content because there is strong language that is being used. Also, some somewhat graphic imagery. So just wanted to share that before we start. The first question, because Ye, such an enigmatic persona, is Ye Starman? Now, this is a very fascinating conspiracy about the connection between David Bowie and Ye. As you can see in The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and The Spiders from Mars, which was released in '72, there's a sign that says K West, right? And in the album, which is sort of a concept album that was very difficult in many ways for Bowie because, you know, he became Ziggy Stardust, as you all know, to the point of almost having a psychotic break, and he had to distance himself from this character. And so anyways, there's a song on there called Starman that predicts this coming of a starman who's waiting in the sky, would like to come and meet us. And there are theories that this starman is Ye, because another reference on the album is 5 years, that this starman will come in 5 years. And believe it or not, fascinating coincidence, Ye is born 5 years after the release of this album. So of course, it's wild. And of course, you see the lines, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie, kind of referencing that this starman is basically there to liberate mostly children, kids, young people. And Ye in 2015 famously said, listen to the kids, bro. And of course, Freud asked the question, where do children come from and what has the father to do with their origin? Now, the question, of course, of the father is a big question here. That will be a big theme throughout the presentation. Is Ye a demigod? He said in 2013, I am a god, even though I'm a man of God. So sort of a contradicting himself. And this is something that we'll see throughout as well, these sort of contradictory, perhaps dialectical statements. Is he a god or is he a man of God? Is he a false messiah? Jesus, right? As he called himself when he released that album. And is he Antichrist? Another suggestion would be to think of him as the fool, the sort of from the tarot. This is the Tarot of Marseille, which was restored by Alejandro Jodorowsky, a Chilean artist that had a big influence on Ye. And you can see a picture top right of Jodo with Ye, which I begin the book with. That's kind of my entry into the rabbit hole of Kanye West. And you can see how the cover art for Vultures 1, which is his most recent album in collaboration with Ty Dolla Sign, is very much inspired by Jodorowsky's The Holy Mountain, which is probably one of the most famous surreal cult films of all time. Now, Jodorowsky met with Ye in France, and he actually did a tarot reading for him. And in the tarot reading, it happens that Ye received the Fool card. Okay, and another card that he received was the World. So he's the Fool moving toward the world. So I asked whether he is not only the fool, but also the king of the fools, given the sort of references with Jesus as well. Is he a monster? He refers to himself sometimes as a monster. He says, everybody knows I'm mother effing monster. I'm gonna need to see your effing hands at the concert, 2010. He uses that imagery, of course, very racialized and perhaps also sexualized imagery. And in 2022, he has these images from the music video for Easy, his collaboration with the game, where he's seen to be decapitating Pete Davidson, which of course we can think of that also as castration, right? So the monster, the incarnate son, and the connection here, of course, is made explicit by Zizek and others regarding the monstrosity of Christ. And so it's sort of using some of Zizek's language here. Is Ye an ethical monster without empathy, doing what is to be done in a weird coincidence of blind spontaneity and reflexive distance, helping others while avoiding their disgusting proximity? For Zizek, with more people like this, the world would be a pleasant place in which sentimentality would be replaced by a cold and cruel passion. So I start here with sort of making sense of his discography, especially for people that are not familiar with his work, his musical output in particular. So scholars have sort of come up with 4 periods to make sense of his discography. And those 4, actually 3 periods, Dropout Bear, Constructing a Fantasy, Commander of Culture, and you can see the periods of time for each period, and then the kind of albums that are released for those periods. And those periods are kind of really distinct in the sense that when he's moving between one period and another, there's really a cut. Okay, they're really punctuated in many ways. Now, the period that I focus on in my book, and which I gave that title to, is the shaky ass years from 2016 to 2021. And that's on a personal level, very tumultuous period, because he has a nervous breakdown in 2016. And that was kind of how I got hooked into his world. I got curious about him because, you know, he would interrupt his performance during a concert and start talking for a long time. These speeches would be labeled rants in the media and the public. And then, of course, with someone that has a psychoanalytic ear, is curious to hear the unconscious in those speeches. So this is exactly what I did. I got hooked, and I couldn't really unhook myself for many years. Okay, so this whole rabbit hole took me 7 years of research. Started in 2016 until 2022 when, and then, so the book really covers that period that I call the shaky ass years, and which is when he's officially diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And we're going to use the psychoanalytic term for it, which is manic depression. And And then there's a new period that I kind of theorize in the preface in the book because I had to for ethical and political reasons, which is I call the fascist era that begins in 2022. And this is really the focus of my presentation today. And I'm going to touch on aspects of the previous periods, but I'm going to really focus on the fascist era the most. So now I wanted to highlight some of those cuts that I referred to so you can get a sense of those transitions. Some key dates. Ye was born on June 8th, 1977 in Douglasville, Georgia. And weirdly enough, I lived for 5 years in Georgia, close to Douglasville. But anyways, that's 5 years after the release of Bowie's album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. So that's the connection to Starman. Donda and Ray West, his parents, formalized their divorce on August 28, 1980. So you can see they got divorced 3 years after his birth, but they actually separated before that. After which Donda and Ye moved from Atlanta to Chicago, and he basically was raised in Chicago. In 2002, Ye almost dies in a car crash. So that picture of him after the car crash is he immortalizes this experience in the song Through the Wire, which is probably one of his most popular songs. And then Donda West dies in 2007. So you can see that cut over here. She is not properly mourned until 2021 with the release of his album Donda, which is the album where he actually deals with the mourning and the melancholia directly. But you can imagine, look how many years have passed between 2007 to 2021, where you can see that the affects are there, but there's no direct reference in his work, really. He marries Kim Kardashian in 2014, and they file for divorce in 2021. Kim almost dies in 2016. There was a robbery situation in Paris where she was pretty much abducted and feared for her life. And this is something that he learned about while he was in concert. And that's when he had a major nervous breakdown. So that's not the only reason. That's a big reason. But the other one being that 2016 was also a year that had the US presidential election, which was very polarizing for the United States. So there's a lot going on. Effectively, it all leads to this intensification, his nervous breakdown, his hospitalization, and then his diagnosis with bipolar disorder. So he experiences the nervous breakdown in 2016. During the same Pablo tour, he cancels the rest of the tour. And so the book, as you can see, my book looks at this period of time. And this is a period just to give you some context too, for most fans, it's probably the least interesting period. Most fans like his work before then. And most fans will make a distinction between the old Kanye and the new Kanye, okay? So in this period, it's the period where he's struggling head on with manic depression. He says he's always been saying controversial things, but you can see an intensification of those kinds of statements around that time. And it gets even worse from 2022 with anti-Semitism. But basically, to me, it's a very interesting period to think about from a psychoanalytic perspective. And also to think about his creative output, which is undervalued as well. So my book is focused on the shaky ass years, and this is if you're wondering about this phrase, it's a phrase from one of his songs where he makes that reference. So I just use his own words. But today I wish to explore his turn toward fascism since 2022, particularly through a psychoanalytic reflection on his antichrist praxis, and I'll try to unpack really what that is. And for that, I really look at parallels between him and Nietzsche. Both being aristocratic rebels, to use a term from Lo Surdo. Ye says, name one genius that ain't crazy. No one man should have all that power. Eva Cybulska makes the argument that Nietzsche suffered from manic depression. So again, there's personal connections between them, but also interesting theoretical connections. There's, of course, the Übermensch ideal as something that I will explore a little bit as well. So Freud said that psychoanalysis has taught us the intimate connection between the father complex and belief in God, and daily demonstrate to us how youthful persons lose their religious belief as soon as the authority of the father breaks down. In the parental complex, we thus recognize the roots of religious need. The almighty, just God in kindly nature appear to us as grand sublimations of father and mother, but rather as revivals and restorations of the infantile conceptions of both parents. You can see on the left image of Nietzsche's autobiography, AKA Ye, which I believe was published posthumously, and fan art made representing Ye, especially in the Vultures era, kind of emulating this figure, right? This figure who's associated with the Übermensch, with Nietzsche. So interesting parallels that I'm going to be looking at throughout aesthetically in that sense too. Another connection that could be made is between Wagner and Ye. I know that sounds a little bit of a stretch, but Wagner obviously had this concept which informed his work, Wagner being a frenemy of Nietzsche, Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work. So this idea that being a total artist in the sense that people that don't really know Ye think he's just a rapper, but people that really are familiar with his work know that he's a designer. He does operas. He makes films. The bottom, this is an image from this film that he made called Cruel Summer, which was screened at Cannes, and it was using this technology of using 7 screen panels, which was something that hasn't been done that way. So it's kind of proprietary. And the center image is from an opera that Ye pretty much produced and directed. And then, of course, we all know about his Yeezy brand, which is his fashion line. So we have to think of him not just as a musician, but as an artist in a kind of total sense. So there are interesting connections here. Bipolarity as power. So one of the things that Ye talks about, you all remember he had the whole phase where he was identified with Trump and was using the MAGA hat, which upset a lot of people. But according to him, when he puts this hat on, it made him feel like Superman, Übermensch, his favorite superhero. It made and then he said to Trump, this was him talking to Trump directly, "You made a Superman cape for me." So for him, wearing this hat, which everyone was telling him not to do, made him feel powerful. Okay. So again, we see here another interesting example. This is the album cover for his album, which is titled Ye. And this is, again, produced in that shaky ass period. And he says on there, he took this picture with his phone, and then he says on there, "I hate being bipolar. It's awesome." Right? And it really captures manic depression in a statement. So in a way, it's brilliant. But what he does in this album is that he reframes bipolarity or manic depression as power, which is a total Nietzschean move. So in a sense, we have to ask, is Ye Nietzsche's eternal return as difference? Now, Ye's bourgeois class position, a position obviously invested in white supremacy and heteropatriarchy by default, is complicated by the traumatic dimension of racial sexual violence framing Black male subjectivity in the US. Similarly, his fascist politics post-2021 are undermined by the anti-fascist potential of his tragic aesthetics and messianic ethics. And this is why I find it, a lot of things that he does and says are obviously a turnoff for many people, including myself. And at the same time, there's something there that is worth critiquing and reflecting on. And this is what I attempt to do. So here's an example of him in 1994 wearing a "Say No to Nazis, New America" t-shirt, right? And we're going to see in later examples that he does the complete opposite. So going back to the question, is Ye Antichrist? So for me, this is not a theological question, rather a scientific, philosophical, psychoanalytic one. Following Nietzsche, to be Antichrist means to be against decadence values, such as nihilism, pity, denial of life. In other words, we can frame it as the death drive in psychoanalysis. Pity for Nietzsche is practical nihilism. Pity persuades to nothingness. And then to be antichrist is to be against slave morality or chandala morality, to be against equal rights as a form of ressentiment, to be against the cosmopolitan God of the merely good, so in a sense against internationalism, or God as God of the sick, God as spider, God as spirit, to be against Jesus as a heroic or genius redeemer type, to be against the church, priests, and Pauline Christianity in general, and to be against faith, belief, and revelation. To be antichrist also means to be for revaluation of all values, which for Nietzsche means going back to natural values or actuality, which could be framed as the life drive, is to be for noble or master morality, such as life affirmation. There's a hierarchy to Nietzsche's thinking regarding his aristocratic elitism, which again we can see in Ye as well, where spiritual types are at the top of the hierarchy, followed by the muscular types who defend those spiritual types. And then the bottom of the pyramid are the mediocre types, which for Nietzsche would be the herd or most people. And then Nietzsche believed in national gods, not international gods. National gods are expressions of the will to power. And again, you can see how that would manifest as Christian nationalism. To be antichrist also means to be for Jesus as a singular being, to be for Jesus as a political criminal, as a free spirit who lived and died for a new way of living, not a new belief. To be for science, wisdom of the world, and to be for skepticism, to be for action, practice, and instinct. So again, we see a lot of those things that the Antichrist is for and against. We see that reflected in Ye as well. So both Nietzsche and Ye admire Jesus and identify with him to different degrees. Ye calls God his daddy, which speaks to the function of the imaginary father in the absence of the real father. So Ye's real father is Ye. He's Ray, which obviously rhymes with Ye. So that's an interesting parapraxis here. Just want to add another note. You all are familiar with Kim Kardashian's famous sex tape, which she filmed with her then boyfriend Ray. So it's interesting that her ex-boyfriend's name was also Ray. So Ray, Ye's father, he chose his career. He was a photographer, and he chose his career over his son. And this is why ultimately Donda and him separated. Okay, so this theme of abandonment is a huge one for Ye's subjectivity. Okay, it's very structural. Furthermore, Donda placed herself in the position of the symbolic father as a single mother. Nietzsche is obviously more strongly identified with Zarathustra. However, Ye's identification with Jesus is ambivalent because he also presents himself as an alternative redeemer through the signifier Jesus, a non-castrated national god who is beyond good and evil. Similarly, they're both critical of Christianity as an institution, Christians as representatives of the herd, and Judeo-Christian ideology understood as slave morality. Their critiques are from a bourgeois class position, which affords them the privileges and leisures of aristocratic rebellion. Consequently, they both have been considered not only geniuses and free spirits, but also bigoted monsters that must be cancelled for their fascism. Examples of Ye's critiques of Christianity, which I read as a hystericization of paternal authority, given the unconscious associations between Ray and leftism Christianity, which for Ye's unconscious would amount to decadence, to use a concept from Nietzsche. Ye formed his own congregation, perhaps a cult, in 2019 called Sunday Service. The images on the right are from that. You can see references throughout his career. Jesus Walks from 2004, so this is from his first album, where he associates Jesus with hustlers, killers, murderers, drug dealers, and even the scrippers. Scrippers meaning strippers. 2013, I Am a God, I am a God, even though I'm a man of God. And this is a really important statement that I will keep returning to. Hands on 2019, what have you been hearing from the Christians? They'll be the first one to judge me, make it feel like nobody loved me. And then very recently, in an interview, he said, I have my issues with Jesus. There's a lot of stuff I went through that I prayed, and I didn't see Jesus show up. I'm God. I'm the God of me. And you can't tell me who I am. I'm the God of me. I don't know if I'm in heaven already. Another thing I don't like in Christianity, the fear of God. If God is love, why should you fear him? And so you can see here the critique of Christianity, but also critique of leftism in a sense. He says, you can't bully me. Liberals can't bully me. News can't bully me. The hip hop community, they can't bully me. So in some, the foreclosure of the ray of the Father, I say the ray of the Father as a variation on the name of the Father, is the negation of both radical politics, such as socialism, and Pauline Christianity. So the Antichrist, a Jesusian Zarathustrian of sorts, aspires to become a self-redeemer, hence the motif of baptism by fire as a psychospiritual ritual purification signifying ego death and rebirth as Übermensch. You can see this throughout Ye's work. So I have images from his music video for Power. This is from a collaboration that he did called Burn Everything. This one here, Phoenix rising out of the ashes from Runaway. Those two images of him burning in the sacred fire, again, paralleling Zarathustra on the right here, are from listening parties for Donda. So basically what he's burning Kanye West, right? And he's being reborn as Ye. So people love Kanye West. Remember, we talked about the old Kanye versus the new Kanye. People love Kanye West, which I qualify as a project and object, not a person. Kanye West refers to a project that he's been working on for a while. It also refers to him as an object, a fantasy object for fans, for consumption, as a commodity. So there's Kanye West as a project, as an object, but there's also Ye as a subject. And people mostly hate Ye as a subject, okay? But that doesn't really give us a chance to really understand his subjectivity and understand how it's tied to the social. And this is what I'm interested in. So this displacement from Kanye to Ye after 2016, that year where he had the nervous breakdown, signifies a symptom, in my opinion. The foreclosure of the ray of the Father, leftism and Judeo-Christianity, a movement from Kanye West as a symbolic imaginary project object to Ye as a manic-depressive subject. Ye is like a letter that marks the traumatic real of abandonment. Ye is one of the most commonly used words in the Bible, and it means you. You, the fans, as in we, are the fourth ring linking the symbolic, imaginary, and real for Ye. The eternal recurrence of all things, according to Nietzsche, is the highest of all possible formulas of a Ye-saying philosophy, right? So Ye is also yes, right? Ye is you, Ye is yes. Like Joyce, Ye produces music in such a way that the language of music no longer exists. This is the elation, according to Lacan, that we're told lies at the root of a sort of symptom that in psychiatry we call mania. Ye's manic unconscious is dialectically informed by the legacy of unconditional love, which is Donda's and Ray's legacy. It's a parental legacy. It is an ancestral legacy. It is both an affirmation and a negation of this legacy. It's a traumatic legacy, to put it in simple words. Then there's the mother's desire for giantness and nothingness, and I'm going to unpack this later, which sheds light on Ye's polarization between life-driven giantness, I am a god, and death-driven nothingness, burn everything. Right? So either I'm a god or burn everything. There's nothing in between. It's really extreme. This is the ambivalence at the very heart of Ye's being. So I'll explore a little bit the libidinal economy of Kanye West, the project object, versus Ye, the subject. So this is Bianca Sensori, his current wife, and she's wearing this shirt that says wet, and this is a shirt that he designed. So thinking about the Borromean knot and kind of unpacking this further, we can talk about the imaginary fantasy at work and the foreclosure of the ray of the father and how that plays into the fascist spectacle as an aestheticization of politics. And it explains his anti-left, anti-Christ stance, which is basically an anti-ray stance, anti the real father who abandoned him. It's also a pro-Trump, pro-Jesus stance because they're redeeming imaginary fathers. There's also here the fetishization of Yeezy as a commodity. So Yeezy is the brand, right? At the symbolic level, we have the discourse of unconditional love, which is a subjectification of the mother's desire as cause. So this is what I call the legacy of unconditional love, and I use the term from Freud here, archaic inheritance, basically referring to transgenerational trauma, but in the form of a discourse that's passed on, this is our story, which in the context of Ye would be the story of the enslavement of Africans and the story of, the transatlantic slave trade, and then, of course, the civil rights era after Jim Crow and all of that. But this manifests in a couple of ways. I think on a superficial level, it manifests as love bombing. So in an interview that he did on Alex Jones, he says, "I like Hitler." Again, you never exactly know if he really means that or if it's a provocative statement. It's hard to tell. But in any case, he says that, which, it's an act. But then he also says love is the new money. So again, it's interesting to think about that in terms of the libidinal economy as well. And then there's the question of real trauma or surplus enjoyment under racial capitalism, the traumatic reel of new slavery. So this is him saying, I know that we, the new slaves, I see the blood on the leaves. Okay. Okay. So there's the non-being of black male subjectivity and the fungibility of the black male body as overexploited flesh, which in the context of racial capitalism manifests through racial sexual violence. Now, this sort of complex account shows us why it's to just boil everything down to his megalomania or to his ego or to one aspect of his subjectivity doesn't really help us understand what's going on. And this is why we have to kind of build a complex account of this subjectivity. And it helps us with critiquing him too, and critiquing this kind of reactionary politics. So there's the symptom, as I mentioned before, ye as in you, as in we, but also as in yes, right? Very Nietzschean in that sense. And of course, psychotic, manic-depressive subjectivity reframed as power. So on clinical structures or manic depression versus bipolar disorder, so we know in psychoanalysis we have three main categories: neurosis, psychosis, and perversion. Manic depression falls under psychosis. The three clinical or cyclical structures in psychoanalysis are more than diagnostic categories. They are structural categories that reveal the position of the subject based on the form of negation they use: repression, foreclosure, or disavowal, respectively. In other words, Ye is a psychotic subject because he forecloses the ray of the father. And I like that phrase, this variation on the name of the father, because it captures the real father and the imaginary father at the same time. So, the ray of the father, as you can see in the image, would be kind of symbolizing God, but it's also the name of his actual father, right? His biological father. American psychiatrists, according to Fink, psychoanalysts and psychologists seem intent on introducing ever more classifications and diagnostic categories, but none of their categories does anything but tag a particular symptom or set of symptoms manifested by an individual at a given moment in time. Each such category represents but a micro symptom or mini pattern in a person's overall psychological makeup. So in other words, bipolar disorder is kind of a misguided term because it confuses the symptom with the category, right? And this is why we have to go back to the psychoanalytic understanding of manic depression, which is what I do in the book. Now, of course, I can't go into this here because in the book I have a section that's very long, from pages 55 to 98, where it's just reviewing the psychoanalytic literature on manic depression. And I really focus on the work of Carl Abraham, Sigmund Freud, Melanie Klein, Winnicott, Darian Leader, Christopher Bollas in particular. Lacan didn't have a lot to say about manic depression. He obviously wrote a lot about psychosis, but the ones that I found the most enlightening were the three that I've highlighted the covers for here. Of course, Freud's famous Mourning and Melancholia, Darian Leader's Strictly Bipolar, and then Christopher Bollas, he has a book called Three Characters. There's a whole chapter dedicated to manic depression. So how I make sense of Ye's psychotic manic depressive subjectivity. Remember my reference to the mother's desire for giantness and nothingness? So this is a reference from the documentary Genius, a Kanye trilogy, which was released on Netflix. I'm not sure how many of you have seen it, but in the documentary, there's a scene. It's kind of a very lovely moment in the film where his mom, who was the chair of the English department at Chicago State University, and very, very intelligent and compassionate lady, she was telling him the giant looks in the mirror and sees nothing. Right? So kind of a paradoxical statement. And there's a fan art that's made on the left here. So the image on the left here, you can see it's an image of Ye looking into the mirror, and he doesn't see his reflection. It's a very interesting statement to think about in terms of Lacan's mirror stage, right, and development of the ego. So you see in that moment in the film where Ye is confused. He's not sure what his mom means, but she puts that sort of desire on him. And I argue that that's kind of like functions as an objet A for him, and is something that he's trying to subjectify throughout his life, throughout his career. And of course, sometimes he succeeds, sometimes, a lot of times he fails. But if we think about his subjectivity as divided between ego and unconscious, we can place depression on the side of the ego, where the statement from his song, even though I'm a man of God. So this is kind of like, in a sense, humbling statement. And what the more interesting side is the manic unconscious, where he would say, I am a God. And so that's the giantness, right? And so this question of what is this nothingness, I think, is an important question that we have to think about. And on the other side, we have the other, more specifically the mother, who had to play the role of the father and the mother all at once. There's the objet that we refer to, but also there's the barred other, which is the legacy of unconditional love, that sort of traumatic legacy that I referred to. So on the one hand, we have the desire of the mother for giantness, nothingness. So yeah, the desire of the mother for giantness, nothingness is over present, and then the ray of the father, which again signifies leftism and Christianity unconsciously, is absent, right? The abandoning father. This is Ray West, his biological father. He was a member of the Black Panther Party, which of course was a leftist radical party. Ray West is currently a Christian marriage counselor. So I ask, so on the left here, the image on the left, that's Ray West in 1970. And then on the right, that's him with Ye in the music video for Follow God in 2019. So you can see this kind of movement from leftism to Christianity, that spectrum, which is represented by the ray of the Father. And even though, Ye is smiling in that picture, I think this is a real source of suffering for him, as you can imagine, for his subjectivity. Is it surprising that Ye is both anti-left and anti-Christ? Mania is basically Ye's solution to his depression from abandonment, whether it's divorce, his father leaving, death of the mother, that's a form of abandonment as well, abortion, which he ran for president in 2020, and he had this very bizarre rally where he was wearing a bulletproof vest, and he started talking about the this conversation that he had with his then wife, Kim Kardashian, about aborting their first daughter, and he started crying nonstop. And of course, the political rally turned into something completely different, which is what you would expect from an event like that with Ye. But abortion is, again, another form of abandonment. And abandonment is a word, that a signifier that he does use throughout his work. So he has a song called Never Abandon Your Family, for example. The foreclosure of the ray of the father, a leftist Judeo-Christian signifier. So from Kanye West Project Object to Ye Subject after 2016, you can see a parallel to the biblical God, why have you forsaken me? Right? So I just wanted to give a couple of notes on psychoanalytic biography. This is from Freud. The first psychoanalytic biography that we know of is Freud's biography of Leonardo da Vinci, which is a fantastic text, by the way. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And in it, he says, if a biographical study is really intended to arrive at an understanding of its hero's mental life, it must not, as happens in the majority of biographies, as a result of discretion or prudishness, silently pass over its subject's sexual activity or sexual individuality. What is known of Leonardo in this respect is little, but that little is full of significance. In an age which saw a struggle between sensuality without restraint and gloomy asceticism, Leonardo represented the cool repudiation of sexuality, a thing that would scarcely be expected of an artist and a portrayer of feminine beauty. So here, Freud really presents us with a methodology of how to do a psychoanalytic biography. Another classic study is from Bernard Meyer, which was on Joseph Conrad. And Meyer says the psychoanalytic biographer can make no claim to psychoanalyze a dead or living artist. What he or she can aspire to is a painstaking application of psychoanalytic principles and insights to two main sets of data: the available facts of the artist's life and his or her creative works. So this is really what I try to do with Ye. I look at everything that he produces, creatively, artistically, but also everything that he says and does. And I really try to read all of that very closely. So it's different from psychoanalyzing, but it is a form of psychoanalytic biography. Now, it's interesting in both cases, we're dealing with artists, right? And in my case, also, so that's interesting to think about psychoanalytic biography and its relation to artists and creativity. So given what Freud said, we have to focus on the sexual. So now we turn to the sexual, because otherwise, we wouldn't be doing psychoanalysis here. So I have some interesting images here. So this is Ye up here with Amber Rose, his ex-girlfriend. And after they broke up, she tweeted the tweet that you can read. Again, these are all interesting. Can you all see it?
Sorry, so I clicked on something and I was wondering if it was just for me or for everyone.
Oh, did we lose the screen?
Yeah,
Sorry about
because I was trying to turn off the thing. Could you try sharing your presentation again? Oh, perfect.
Can you all see it now?
Yes, sorry about that.
So the previous one had quotes from Freud and Meyer, and this one has yeah, okay. So Amber Rose here, and then you can see her tweet, and then Ye also dated Julia Fox briefly for like a month, and she wrote a whole memoir that's full of her like sexual adventures, and she says that she never slept with Kanye West. So that's interesting. Like they dated for a whole month, and that they didn't. And then of course Amber Rose talks about some anal eroticism here, and she's using that to kind of shame him publicly. Another thing is this is a quote from Ye in 2019. He says, "Playboy was my gateway into full-blown pornography addiction." So he says that he's a pornography addict. My dad had a Playboy left out at age 5, and this is significant because he's referencing his dad, blaming him basically for his addiction. And it's affected almost every choice I made for the rest of my life. From age 5 to now, having to kick the habit, and it just presents itself in the open like it's okay. And I stand up and say, it's not okay. So he says that Ye says, I have addiction to porn and it destroyed my family. He blames his father for this. His ex-wife, as you can see, was, did a Playboy feature. And not only that, in 2018, there was Pornhub Awards that he designed, and he was in charge of designing the awards. And so you can see some of the merch that his brand Yeezy did for the Pornhub Awards. So a lot of interesting contradictions at work here. But the things that are worth highlighting are him blaming his father, right? The father left the Playboy on the table or whatever somewhere. He found it at age 5 and somehow he's been hooked ever since. Yeah, so this is Ye and Bianca Sensori, his current wife. This is them on a boat in Italy in September of last year. And basically the paparazzi caught them while, in the act of oral sex. Okay. And again, is this intentional? Is it accidental? Is this the pornographic dimension at work here? It's hard to tell, but we know that in the song from his last album, which is called Fuck Some, he says with pride, referencing this event, so he's not ashamed of it, right? Now, this is a very, very latest development. He plans to launch Yeezy Porn. This was announced like a day or 2 days ago. So he's going from complaining about how his father is responsible for his porn addiction and how this is so bad. And then now he's actually going to have his own porn brand, Yeezy Porn. So that, very interesting, but again, speaks to the extremes of manic depression. Okay. And of course, we have to think of this in relation to Lacan's Il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel. Ye is beautiful. How am I doing on time, just so I'm aware?
Yeah, you're okay, Robert. Don't worry.
Okay, so Ye's beautiful, dark, twisted, pornographic fantasy obviously signifies phallic jouissance, which Lacan qualified as masturbatory, or the jouissance of the idiot. And we can think of the idiot as well as the fool if you go back to Jodorowsky's tarot reading of Ye. This is the original artwork for his 2010 album, which is an image of him having sex with possibly an angel. And this was censored. So in retail stores, they use this alternative cover on the right. And then in some digital stores, they would use like a blurred version. So it's curious to go, if you search for it, which one you will see. And the art is by George Kondo. So here, moving to Vultures era, which is again his last album. I find it very uncanny to hear the crowd chant the song Carnival. And this specific line from Vultures, where he says, "How I'm anti-Semitic, I just effed a Jewish B word." What makes it really disturbing, especially, is how the crowd chants this with a lot of energy, right? And this is kind of the fascistic dimension here that I call, following Benjamin, the aestheticization of politics, right? On the left, this is an image of Inter Milan Ultras recording the choir for the song. So again, there are parallels here between ultras, extreme football or soccer fans, and this kind of public display of a sexual act that everyone is cheering, which is reminiscent in some ways of those orgy scenes in Eyes Wide Shut. Right, it has definitely a perverse quality to it, and you can see here the lines in the song: "Go, go, 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 had so good, she on a roll," and then goes on and on. But basically, it's a song that's glorifying oral sex and all of that. So there are some connections as well between ultras and fascism. So these are ultras fans, using the Nazi salute, etc. And then on the top right here, this is an image of the crowd at Ye's listening parties, especially lately. For me, when I look at it, it does remind me of some of the imagery in Triumph of the Will. Okay, and I'll show you some parallels later. This is also a skinhead from the music video for Carnival. right? So imagine that crowd would be chanting lines like this, or chanting along with the Inter Milan ultras. So I turn here to Wilhelm Reich to think about the anti-sexual attitude of mystical and reactionary individuals, such as incels, and their sadistic concept of sexual life. So Reich argues in The Mass Psychology of Fascism that a third source of the anti-sexual defense forces is the sadistic concept of sexual life, which all children acquire at an early age in all patriarchal societies. Since any inhibition of natural genital gratification increases the sadistic impulses, the whole sexual structure becomes sadistic. Since further, genital impulses become to a large extent replaced by anal ones, the sex reactionary concept of the debasement of woman by sexual intercourse gains further support. So again, this for me describes exactly what we were looking at previously. So this impossibility of the sexual signifies obviously the fantasy at work in phallic jouissance, but also the impotent passions such as love, hate, or ignorance one feels for the barred other or mother. For Ye, love is a function of the mother's desire, that legacy of unconditional love, which is again that barred other. And in a sense, I qualify that also as creative mania. So this is the creative side of his mania, and this is the side that people enjoy. Most people enjoy, which he had this whole campaign, as you can see in the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, where he put "we love" in multiple languages, which was very inspiring. But then, he can move from that to anti-Semitism, right? So how come there's no love there? Whereas hate or ignorance is a function of the foreclosed ray of the father, as I said, leftism, Judeo-Christianity as impossible. And this is what I refer to also as destructive mania. The impossibility of the post-infantile sexuality is also the impossibility of revolutionary politics. And this is why we see fascism and paranoid delusions, such as anti-Semitism. We also see the eternal return of German romanticism and Ye's fascist spectacle. So romanticizing pre-modern nature. And in that sense, we can reframe Antichrist as anti-modernity, right? Because it's fantasizing about a pre-modern time where we were one with nature. And in this fascist ideology, typically, the figure of Jew was removed from nature. And that was the kind of logic. So this is the first cover art that was done for Vultures 1. It then got changed, but as you can see, it's inspired by German romanticism, but also by this metal band called Burzum that has fascistic connections as well. And him on the top right wearing a t-shirt or a long sleeve shirt from this band, Burzum, with JPEG Mafia, and then I'm showing you some of the artwork and how it's inspired by German romanticism. Now, of course, the key artist here is Caspar David Friedrich, born 1774, died 1840. And the image that Ye was referencing is Landscape with Graves, produced between 1835 and 1837. And of course, the image on the left, which is associated with Nietzsche and some of his books as the sort of the Übermensch ideal, is The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog from 1818. And this is Vultures 1 merch. So this is Friedrich in a portrait by Gerhard von Kugelgen. And Hickey argues that after World War II, Caspar David Friedrich's reputation was tarnished by association with the Nazis. Hitler loved German romantic painting, and Friedrich was one of his favorite artists. Scholars and museums steered clear of Friedrich in the post-war years. So we're seeing a resurgence of Friedrich's art through Ye and bands like Burzum. Obviously, Lars von Trier is indexing this aesthetic as well. And you all remember the controversy around Melancholia and what von Trier said. So this is Varg Vikernes, who is the author of this book. You can see that it's using a far-right symbol, and he's the founder of the band Burzum that, Ye was wearing the shirt from. So Ye's account got suspended on X or Twitter in 2022 for him posting this image, which is merging the Star of David with a swastika. This is also the symbol for a UFO religion called Raelism, if you've ever heard of that one. His farcical turn toward fascist aesthetics contradicts the merge for Donda in 2021, for example, which had a Judeo-Christian theme. So you can see on the right here, there's a Star of David. Inside of it, there's a cross. And so this is the merge for Donda, the album that was named after his mother. And basically, it's the album where he is mourning her face on, right? And then that's why this is the end of the shaky ass years. And then we see a shift in 2022 away from this. After the mourning, we see a shift toward full-on fascism. So the manic-depressive subject is not only divided between ego and unconscious, they are polarized between depression and mania. The intensification of his psychotic symptoms, especially paranoid delusions, correlates to his constant feelings of being abandoned or bullied by the left and Christians, which triggers the traumatic anxiety at the heart of his being associated with the ray of the Father, who must remain foreclosed. Some other imagery for Vultures, the double-headed eagle from Yeezy merch for Vultures 1, which indexes images related to the Holy Roman Empire and the Weimar Republic. I go into a little bit this in detail. I don't have time here, but I do want to highlight this probably part because it's really important. So in Freud's book on Leonardo da Vinci, there's a central fantasy that Freud interprets, which is the vulture fantasy. So, and that's just fascinating to me, given how Ye has a whole album called Vultures and this whole theme and motif. So let's unpack that a little bit. So what is this vulture fantasy about? And for Freud, it's a case of passive homosexuality. So Leonardo's dream, this is Leonardo's dreams in his own words. It seems that it had been destined before that I should occupy myself so thoroughly with the vulture, for it comes to my mind as a very early memory. When I was still in the cradle, a vulture came down to me. He opened my mouth with his tail and struck me a few times with his tail against my lips. So Freud interprets this not as a dream, but as a fantasy. For him, this is a fantasy related to infantile sexuality. And he says, while reading in the writings of a church father or in a book on natural science, that the vultures are all females and that they know to procreate without the cooperation of a male, a memory emerged in him, Leonardo, which became transformed into that fantasy, the vulture fantasy, but which meant to say that he also had been such a vulture child, which had a mother but no father. So you can see the parallel with Ye as well. An echo of pleasure which he experienced at his mother's breast was added to this in the manner, as so old impressions alone can manifest themselves. The allusion to the idea of the Holy Virgin with the child, formed by the authors, which is so dear to every artist, must have contributed to it to make this fantasy seem to him valuable and important. For this helped him to identify himself with the Christ child, again, parallel with Ye, Jesus, the comforter and savior of not alone this one woman. In all our male homosexuals, there was a very intensive erotic attachment to a feminine person, as a rule to the mother, which was manifest in the very first period of childhood and later entirely forgotten by the individual. On the top here, we have a picture that sort of, there's a famous argument that the Mona Lisa is Da Vinci's face. And you can see it here when it's split between his face and hers. On the right here, this is the ancient Egyptian goddess Mut, who is a vulture goddess, and she has a phallus. Okay, and Freud again makes reference to her in relation to Da Vinci, and I think we should also think about her in terms of what Ye is doing. So in a sense, we can say that Vultures 1 is Donda 3. And why Donda 3? Because after Donda 1, there's Donda 2, and then we can think of Vultures 1 as Donda 3, but without sublimation. The images at the bottom are very interesting. So Ye made a video game, or was working on a video game revolving around his mother being in heaven, and the player would be trying to get to heaven to be with Donda, right? You can see the mother with the wings, like the vulture, and then he has these images in the center here from his video 24, where he's basically trying to fly toward heaven to be one with his mom. Okay? Of course, when you see Da Vinci's painting of the Madonna with the child, and very sexual picture, and very much relates to Ye's experience with Donda and his identification with Jesus and all of that. So for Freud, the phallus, which was added to the feminine body, was meant to denote the creative primitive force of nature, and that all these hermaphroditic deistic formations express the idea that only a union of the masculine and feminine elements can result in a worthy representation of divine perfection. For Freud, Leonardo was neurotic, especially an obsessional, who sublimated his regressive infantile sexuality through his art, particularly the figure of the smiling woman, mother, and through his desire for knowledge. Ye has this reference, this line, again from Vultures 1, beautiful, naked, big titty women just don't fall out the sky, you know? And this is a line that's a reference to Kevin Smith's movie Dogma. So again, you can see the vulture imagery, the union with the mother, all of that. Freud adds to fly or to be a bird in the dream is only a concealment of another wish, to the recognition of which one can reach by more than one linguistic or objective bridge. When the inquisitive child is told that a big bird like the stork brings the little children, when the ancients have formed the phallus winged, when the popular designation of the sexual activity of man is expressed in German by the word to bird, Vogeln, when the male member is directly called l'uccello, bird, by the Italians, all these facts are only small fragments from a large collection which teaches us that the wish to be able to fly signifies in the dream nothing more or less than the longing for the ability of sexual accomplishment. This is an early infantile wish. So we see all these motifs, again, very interesting to interpret through Freud's interpretation of Da Vinci, right? His psychoanalytic biography. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll stop here, and maybe through the questions, I'll be able to touch on things that I didn't get a chance to go over. It's a very ambitious presentation, has a lot of detailed imagery, and I don't want to go on and on and on. I'd rather hear your questions.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. And yeah, as you say, quite a lot to pick up on there and explore further. So hopefully we collectively can do that through questions. I want to start off with asking you a few questions. I said earlier, if people in the audience have questions to ask, please, if you put up your Zoom hand, and then we can make sure you're unmuted and you can join in the discussion and ask questions of Robert. I want to lots of interesting stuff in there, Robert, that's asked to be explored further. So in no particular order, things that are occurring to me, I was really interested in the idea of fascism that you're talking about, because you put that very much up the front in the in the presentation, and what you talk about seems to me overtly, what you're overtly talking about is likely the aesthetics of fascism rather than fascism per se. And I was just curious, is that what you're indexing when you say fascism, or is there, and I have to say this caveat, I'm not hugely familiar with Kanye West's media profile and the various things he says, so please do excuse my ignorance. Are we talking about political fascism here, or are we talking about the aesthetics of fascism? And to what extent do you see those two things as being necessarily related to each other? In the sense, there may be a resonance of of fascism by adopting an aesthetics of fascism, but it doesn't necessarily reduce to political fascism, or does it?
I don't see. I think it's a great question. I don't see a big distinction because, again, as Walter Benjamin talks about fascism as something that's aestheticizing politics, and that's what it does by its very nature. So it does what it does through the realm of aesthetics. So if you think about Hitler himself, Hitler, sadly to say, was an artist, and you can say he was a failed artist. And you can think about what he did as performance art as well. And he designed the logo, the swastika, the Nazi flag. He designed it himself. And so the aesthetic dimension is a huge aspect of the political propaganda. And in a sense, we can say that psychoanalytically, why this is so problematic, because this is the realm of fantasy. This is really where they're working. They're working in the realm of ideological fantasy. And this is where the political work is being done. And that's why we have to note those things and analyze it. Now, we can be more specific and say that, he has associations with actual contemporary fascists like Nick Fuentes and Milo Yiannopoulos. And, he did run for president and they worked for him. Milo Yiannopoulos is now the director of public affairs for Yeezy, his fashion company. So there are material connections. It's not just ideological. There's definitely a political project at work here. I do see the dangers, and that's why the aesthetic is the most obvious level, because we're able to look at it and analyze it with examples and see the parallels. I just want to show this image quickly since I didn't get a chance. So this is an image from, he does these listening parties that are also very designed. What is the spectacle about? I mean, so first of all, Guy Debord says that fascism is one of the factors in the formation of the modern spectacle. And so when you look at the cover for the Society of the Spectacle and one of the fans at Ye's listening party, like the parallels become very interesting to think about, wearing the Apple glasses, so you're actually, what are you looking at exactly, right? Well, you're looking at this spectacle. What is this spectacle presenting? It's the material reconstruction of the religious illusion. Look at this imagery and look at how it compares to, I compare it to Triumph of the Will next to each other. This is how fascism works. It works through the realm of images and through fantasies, and that's how that politics comes into being. So I don't think we should separate aesthetics from politics, but think about how they relate to one another. So the other side of the formula for Benjamin is to politicize aesthetics. So that would be the anti-fascist response would be, how do we politicize aesthetics? Because fascists aestheticize politics. So they present their politics through the register of aesthetics. So we have to do the opposite. We have to politicize our aesthetics.
Which is kind of then you're pointing to an ethical response to this aesthetic fascism, or aesthetics of fascism. Would that then, are you advocating that we ought to have an ethical response to Kanye West, to Ye, that's his, rather than taking him as this peculiar, contradictory, interesting artist, there's actually something fundamentally dangerous in what he's doing, and it's dangerous precisely because of its contradictions. It's almost, there's a Trojan horse element to it, that the more dangerous elements are smuggled through the more flamboyant elements, and this is something that we ought to be resisting.
Yeah, I think he is politically dangerous, and to cancel him would be more harmful, because then we're actually not taking seriously what's going on. And I think the appropriate response is to critique in the way that I'm trying to do, which is, you still have to be able to see the subjectivity, the complex subjectivity. You still have to be able to see the human being and the child and the relationship with the parents and all of that, right? All the sort of the drama and the trauma, the family drama and the ancestral trauma, all of that, but at the same time be able to critique clearly the fascist politics and the anti-Semitism. But I think the problem I have like with canceling as a response is that then we don't have the tools to, especially because a lot of the audience for this are young people, okay, who are they could be the kind of people that, let's say, for just to simplify, let's say incels. Let's say a lot of people that attend these listening parties are incels. Well, how do we convince them that this is a dangerous politics, and especially when they completely identify with it? We have to be able to do it in an analytic way that shows in details what's going on so that they can see those connections. And I see, this is what I tried to show too with the sexual dimension of the politics too, is that the reactionary politics has a regressive sexual dimension to it. So so do we alienate these people and just ignore that this is happening? Then we have a problem of repeating fascism because we didn't take it seriously. So then we have to really, especially for younger people, show them what's going on here so they can think for themselves and know what they can accept and what they can reject. Because, obviously there's a lot there that's not fascistic. I think the fascistic turn happens in 2022. There are elements from before that are problematic, but the full-on fascism really starts in 2022. So we have to be able to see what is fascism and what is not.
And do you see this, and then again, the question is largely coming from a position of ignorance, but do you see this as something peculiar to Kanye West, or is this symptomatic of an aesthetic, popular media turn in the United States? I say specifically in the United States because presenting seems to relate more directly to the United States than it does necessarily to Europe or to the UK.
Yeah, although he does these listening parties in Europe and they're well attended as well. There's a whole connection with Inter Milan and all of that. I think it's definitely the US specific aspect is the US presidential election, which we're kind of re-experiencing as a trauma, like repeating itself with this upcoming election. So this whole alienation and good and evil, good versus evil. And basically in that alienation, he was like, in a sense, his position is a little bit more complicated because he does wear the MAGA hat and all that, but he has not voted for Trump, for example. And I write about this in the book, he donated money to Hillary Clinton. So it's hard to make sense of that. But again, if we understand that we're dealing with a psychotic subject and we try to take that seriously, but then there's the whole responsibility of someone with that kind of subjectivity being famous and influencing a lot of people in the context of a very polarized country and what that does. So in a sense, yeah, I do see him as a microcosm of what's happening socially, politically in the United States, but we're able to see it more clearly because of the structure of his subjectivity. It's the psychotic openness reveals a lot.
Yeah, I mean, interesting that you said it's hard to make sense of, and that kind of segues into the next point I was curious about, because listening to your presentation, particularly you're talking about the idea of the Antichrist or Kanye as the Antichrist or presenting as the Antichrist. And I was wondering as you were presenting, for whom? For whom is he the Antichrist? For himself? Is he the Antichrist for his audience? Is he the Antichrist for you? And I guess what I'm getting at there is well, psychoanalytically speaking, we're always tangled up in a question of interpretation, a question of um, where meaning is, where meaning happens. Does meaning happen in the subject who produces language, or does meaning happen in the subject who receives that language? And I think that's possibly a particular question, or a question that becomes particularly sharp in relation to mania. And you're making the point that Kanye has been, in DSM terms, has been diagnosed, or proclaims a diagnosis of manic depression, and therefore we start to see him as suffering from or exhibiting mania. And mania can be described very much in terms of language, that idea of language that's is uncontained, that's that manic, that's how we understand manic language. It is the manic subject keeps producing language with no point de capiton in the way that we'd expect, or the way that we're used to dealing with language. But part of the issue there then is that we use the point de capiton as listeners to punctuate. So that starts to shape the understanding of the subject with whom we're in dialogue, or the subjects we're listening to. And I wonder, in that sense, going back to your point, it's hard to make sense of. And to what extent is this a making sense of Kanye West? Or I guess then a broader question there is, how can we understand Kanye West's mania, or how should we understand?
No, it's a great question. Well, my intervention was a response to the sort of media and public approach, was just to dismiss most of what he says as nonsense. But for us as Lacanians or psychoanalysts, the nonsense is very interesting. So I try to take the nonsense seriously. I read the nonsense closely, and I try to interpret it, obviously, as best as I can, and making connections based on his, again, life, what we know. His mom wrote a book about him. So that was kind of an important reference for me, because I really tried to understand him from his mom's perspective. How, and I want to understand how he understands himself. I think dismissing him as just saying nonsense is not the best or most clarifying approach. But then again, you're left with a very difficult alternative, which is to try to decipher nonsense, which is really the task that I tried to do, and it took me 7 years to do. Doesn't mean that I've explained everything, but there's a lot of work that I did that could be, used by other scholars to expand on and to critique. And so it just opens the possibility for interpreting his specific form of nonsense.
And going back to the specific question of the Antichrist, and you talked a lot, particularly in the first half of your presentation, about him presenting as the Antichrist, and you articulate that to Nietzsche. Is there evidence from your research that he was reading Nietzsche? How strong is that link between Kanye and Nietzsche?
I'm not sure if he did or not, because he doesn't like reading. He says that he doesn't like reading, so it's hard for me to know that. But he's the kind of, he's obviously a very intelligent person. He's exposed to a lot of things all the time, just by the fact of meeting people and traveling. And so I don't know how much he knows about Nietzsche, but I do see all these parallels, especially in relation to the will to power. I mean, he does make references to power a lot. He has a song called Power. So that's an important concept for him. But yeah, Antichrist was a helpful concept for try to explain his relationship with Christianity, which I saw as a conflictual relationship similar to Nietzsche's, where there's admiration for Jesus as a redeemer figure, but in a sense as a singular figure who redeems himself, but does not redeem others. And in that sense, I see Ye in the same way, that the concept of Jesus is that this is his way of redeeming himself. And people read it as, wow, he's so egotistical that he's comparing himself to Jesus. But if you look at the exact sentence that he used, and I use those quotes, I am the God of me. It's very specific, right? And in that sense, he's Antichrist.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it is, I mean, it's interesting the way you very much resist that going down that route of the narcissist, which I think is the opposite way to read Kanye West.
Yeah.
Self-obsessed, self-publicist, and almost anything goes as long as it's promoting him. And seems a very
it's less interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very short reading. It doesn't really take us anywhere. There's not a lot to say there. Just picking up on one other thing you said there, in answer to my question about Nietzsche, that he doesn't read. Correct me if I'm wrong, and as I'm not terribly well informed about Kanye West, the individual, and I'm not that familiar with his output either. But his mom was an academic. Is that right? Before she was an academic, and then she
became his manager.
And became his manager. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So there's an interesting, you talk about the kind of the issues with his father, but there also seems to be a kind of rejection of the mother, because there's, you say he doesn't read very much, and there's also a track on his first album, which is
College Dropout. First album.
And there's the track I'm not sure the track's called, but it's the one it samples Aretha Franklin, and it seemed to me, listening to it, it's a song, it's an anti-intellectual song. It's about, a rejection of intellectualism, academia, and yet mother, in a sense, he's rejecting. So there's something curious in the mother relationship going on.
Yeah, because I said, I mean, she's like a symbolic father for him. She does, occupy that position. And in that sense, I think that's the part that he probably rejects. But yeah, there's definitely conflict with the mother. I think that's clear to me. The more obvious one is with the father, but the conflict with the mother is the conflict of overpresence, which the cause of anxiety. She's overpresent. She's playing the father and the mother at the same time, so he doesn't really have space to be himself. So in order to do that, he has to reject academia, which is, symbolized by her. So
the mother is crocodile in Lacan terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and also so in relation to the father, you showed a clip of him, the father to Ray, in one of Kanye's videos. So is there a reparation of that relationship later?
It seems like on a superficial level there is. I mean, the thing about Ye is that, he started that religious cult, Sunday service. And so during that phase, he was, kind of messianic and like seeing hope in everything and seeing everything very positively. So this is like the creative mania phase where, my dad can be in the video, everything is fine. But then the shift from that to the melancholia could be extremely drastic night to day. So we could be distracted by that as some kind of repair, but I think it's a band-aid.
Okay, interesting. That's absolutely fascinating. We're kind of getting close to the end of our time here. I just don't want to cut anyone off if anyone does have any questions. Does anyone from the audience want to jump in with a quick question before we wrap up for the evening?
There is a question in the chat, if not.
So I can never see the chat. Go on, if you can see something like
I thought it was a pretty good question. So what does this analysis of Kanye West broadly offer Lacanian theorizing? And then perhaps a second question, or part of the above, how has this analysis shaped your view on the name of the father or symptom in the psychotic subject?
I think for the first part, it extends the literature on manic depression, the psychoanalytic literature on manic depression, which is not that much, to be honest. What I was surprised by, that most of the strong theorizing on manic depression was done in the early 20th century. And very few studies were done recently. So this contributes to that. And by looking at, and then it adds to the literature on psychoanalytic biography, which again was started with Freud's work on Da Vinci. So those are two big ones. For the second part, the intervention, that I tried to explore is this idea of the ray of the Father. And as in the biological real Father, but also capturing the imaginary Father, God, the ray of the Father. So I feel linguistically that for me captured those two meanings that I was trying to refer to.
Excellent. Well, Robert, thank you so much for a fascinating talk. I was expecting an education and I got one. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
You have a happy customer. Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back to Lacan Scotland again.
Sure.
As I said at the beginning, this the talk is not part of Robert's book. So Robert has written a book on Kanye West, to which he referred, but the talk tonight was really developing ideas from this, which will be in Robert's forthcoming book. This particular book is currently only available in a rather expensive hardback, but it will shortly be available as a much more affordable paperback. So once the paperback is out, we'll put a link on the Lacan Scotland website. So if you're interested in that, you should be able to pick it up soon. We're not exactly sure when, but soon. And thank you very much for tonight. We have one more Lacan Scotland for the academic year. So we have Carol Owens joining us on the last Thursday of next month. So please do come along and join us then. And then we will stop for a customary summer break, and we'll be back in September. And we will stick up on our website the schedule for the coming academic year as soon as we have that finalized. For this evening or afternoon or morning, depending where you are, thank you very much for joining us, and see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.